This morning's message is entitled A Bonhoeffer Moment. It was inspired by the February Sojourners magazine. How many get the Sojourners magazine? Okay, you all should get the Sojourners magazine. I will buy you a subscription. Editor-in-chief is Jim Wallace. I'm not sure you've heard of Jim Wallace, but he's one of our current prophetic voices. I have struggled over the last year with what we call the line, and I'll pick one of these lines. I get really close to the line in my messages, and repeatedly you often make comments as you're going out the door, as you're shaking my hand. So, Pastor, you went right up to the line today, or some people have said you've crossed over the line. Or some people said, I could tell you wanted to go over the line, but you didn't cross the line. And I'm kind of curious, everybody has a definition of the line. The line. Being too political and maybe not spiritual enough. But Zareta told us a number of Sundays ago that this work of justice is a spiritual work. Strange thing is, as we all have our different perspectives of the line, I would like to know when I've crossed the line. Today I may cross the line. What is the line? Or what is the wall, probably in our contemporary world? The wall, like, don't cross it. You better stay on your side of the wall, church, and state you better stay on your side of the wall. Or you may lose your 501c3 standing. That's what I always hear. A few Easters ago, in my previous congregation, we had our young people carry signs of resistance because we felt that Easter is arising and the people are rising up. And one of the members stood up right during the service with the conference minister preaching that particular Sunday, of course, which in our church is kind of like the bishop, and said, wait a minute, you're all going to lose your 501c3. Well, I've directed 501c3s outside of the church and 501c4s, which are political arms, and we ain't anywhere near the line or the wall. So concerning the line or the wall, I have an understanding that as church or as religion, we are the moral compass of our culture. We are the moral compass of our society. And when we were developing our vision statement, we had a lot of conversation around, is First Church to be a moral compass? And we left it out. Because I think you have to ask, what church? What faith? Catholic? One of the 4,000 Protestant denominations, the evangelical church? Is it the mosque? Is it the synagogue? Is it the liberal church? Is it the conservative church? Which church or which religion is God's moral compass? Whose interpretation of the book or the Bible or the sacred writings wins when it comes to morality? And more often than not, I must admit, I agree with Oscar Wilde, and Phil and I love Oscar Wilde and his quotes, who says, morality is simply the attitude we adopt towards people whom we personally dislike. Isn't that a great quote? Well, the line, to be honest, my friends, is getting blurry on both sides of the wall or both sides of the fence. And my opinion is that we need to be bolder, and maybe it's time to step across the line as equality and justice seems to be challenged more and more with each passing day. We've got to be better humans. Not just here in Arizona, but in the United States and across the globe. The injustices and inequalities that are being doled out in the name of Christianity and religion, at least my brand of Christianity and my brand of religion, must stop. And I would venture to say that Jews and Muslims would agree. So today is Transfiguration Sunday. Redeem read the story. Jesus is on a mountain. This is an icon of the story. He's on the mountain with Elijah, Moses, with Peter, James, and John. And to be honest, all 6 of them are transfigured. All 6 of them are transformed and changed by this experience. And these are 6 of the male voices of prophecy in our Hebrew and Christian religions, and I apologize for not having a woman in the group. But this was a moment of transfiguration. It was a passing of the torch, so to speak. And I want to today add another figure to the top of the mountain. And for me, it's someone who was really important in my spiritual journey. This individual was transformative, and I believe is right now speaking volumes and volumes to our current crisis of morals and values. And I would suggest it's the Reverend Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who said, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil." He was a good German Lutheran pastor who understood the concept of the line, of the wall, of the separation of church and state. But he became one of the most powerful resistors to Hitler and to the Nazis in Germany in the 30s and the 40s. He founded an underground seminary which became the center for resistance to the state and led what became known as the Confessing Church, confessing justice and equality for everybody. And it was almost the only church resisting the Nazis' anti-Semitism and white nationalism. Can you imagine that? Every other church was complicit. Yes, church, religion, has for centuries been in bed with the government, right? For their own gain, having lost sight of who Jesus is and how Jesus lived. Bonhoeffer saw his call was to change the world for the better. And to be honest, I've kind of always perceived myself as a resistor of sorts, as somebody who has really desired to be a change maker. I was just sharing with one of our visitors from the land of Cheesehead, Wisconsin, that I spent a lot of time in Wisconsin as an adult, doing resistance and doing change, whether it was with poverty or bigotry or homophobia or advocating for HIV-positive people, for homeless, runaway, throwaway youth. And to be honest, I think the United Church of Christ follows the train of these incredibly bold German Lutherans like Bonhoeffer and Martin Luther, because the United Church of Christ actually has some German roots, by the way. How many are German here? How many have done Ancestry.com? I think half of our country probably has some German roots. But as I've studied these resistors to the power that be in seminary, I wanted to be like them. Martin Luther's bold statement was, "Here I stand, I can do no other." And he spoke these words of resistance to the most powerful figure in his day, which was the Pope, who was investigating his radical beliefs. Martin Luther was a resistor who lived in the 1500s in Germany when the church, not the government, but the church was oppressing the poor and taking advantage of those in the margins. Martin Luther reminds us that every time we stand up and speak out, every time you put your feet to the pavement and you march, every time you go to a candlelight vigil for a cause, every time we raise our voice against injustice and abusive religion and abusive political powers, we are saying, "Here I stand, I can do no other." Of course, with tennis shoes. And following Martin Luther and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, they both resisted the corrupt religious and spiritual systems of their day. And I love what Dietrich Bonhoeffer said. He said this: "As much as the Christian would like to remain distant from political struggles, nonetheless, even here the commandment of love encourages Christians to stand up for his or her neighbor." For Bonhoeffer, this took the form of protecting his Jewish neighbors who were suffering and dying in concentration camps. And they required him to actually work toward a regime change as a double agent and a traitor to the state. And that's not what you hear about pastors very often, is it? But he would not have had to do that if the people of faith in his time had recognized the evil of white nationalism and anti-Semitism. We all know, probably, maybe, that Bonhoeffer also went to an extreme. He even helped plan the murder of Hitler. Now, I would never suggest that. And in asking, is this a Bonhoeffer moment, I would say that violence is never the answer. But only 15 years after Bonhoeffer, only 15 years after Bonhoeffer was killed, there was another Martin Luther King Jr. who said, can you imagine, it was just 15 years between the closing of the concentration camps and the civil rights movement here in the United States. 15 years. And Martin Luther King said, nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political, moral questions of our time. That's why we're singing songs about take our hate and make it love. Take our war and make it peace. But most of all, there's something that I love about Bonhoeffer. He had this ultimate question that he layered over absolutely everything in his life. And it was this: who is Jesus Christ for us today? That was the question he layered over absolutely every decision he made. In Bonhoeffer's mind, it forced him, and I think it should force us, to ask ourselves if we recognize Christ in each other. Do you recognize Christ in the back of the head in front of you? Do you recognize Christ in the people around you? Do we recognize Christ in everybody that is now being othered by our political structures in ways that push minorities even further into the margins and crush them against walls of intolerance? Acts 17:26 says, God has arranged it so that all the races of humanity on the earth come from one blood. There's the fact, folks. We are all connected. It is all blood from the same human family that runs through our veins. The question in our narrative today, as Jesus is engulfed in light and Moses and Elijah and James and Peter and John, as they're engulfed on the top of that mountain, there's a voice from the sky, and they're all terrified, and they question, who is this Jesus? Who was this Jesus back in their day? Who was this Jesus in Bonhoeffer's day? Who was this Jesus in Martin Luther King's day? And who is this Jesus for us today? In Bonhoeffer's day, the issue was how to be a disciple of Christ in opposition to the church leaders who were offering to Hitler their commitment and their patronage, creating, in effect, a state church. In Bonhoeffer's classic work entitled The Cost of Discipleship, he tells church leaders they better get busy. He warns them to tell the people in the pews that they were being infected by a political regime that was not divine. So I ask, is this a Bonhoeffer moment? I always wonder how I would have lived in Germany in the 1930s and 40s, what I would have done. And since I kind of was on the end of the civil rights movement, I continue to ask myself, where would I have been in the middle of the civil rights movement? What would you have done had you been living in Germany in the 30s and the 40s? Today, there are forces that are shaping, or actually I would say misshaping, our world. Nationalism, growing economic inequality, misogyny, destabilizing climate change when it's 10 to 15 degrees warmer in Phoenix during the winter, unprecedented forced migration, increasing militarization, a military parade, seriously? down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. This is the only picture, by the way, that I got of the military parades that happened quarterly in Novosibirsk when I lived in Siberia, Russia, because after I took this one picture, they threatened to take my camera away, and I was led off to the authorities to wait out the parade. And let me say, military parades, they are chilling experiences. My friends, America first is a theological heresy. Jesus' theology was humanity first. The body of Christ is the most radical and culturally diverse faith community in the world. Our connection to our brothers and sisters all over this planet makes our political convictions global and our political impact global and not just national. I do believe this is somehow a Bonhoeffer moment. I don't know what that looks like. I don't really know what that means. But I believe it's also a kairos moment. And I've talked about this before. A kairos moment is a God moment. For me, that's what keeps me going. That's what gives me hope. A kairos moment is a perfect, delicate, crucial moment, a time when conditions are right for the accomplishment of a crucial action or a decision. Kairos are God moments. They are not man or woman moments, but they are God moments. In this God moment, we are called to be a voice that challenges political and religious systems that allow nationalism and money and power and resources to usurp humanity. In this time, in this kairos moment, along with Bonhoeffer, I say, we must be ready to allow ourselves to be interrupted by God. We must allow ourselves to be interrupted by God. I think the time has come for many people in America. I can't speak for other countries. They don't want to hear Christians talk about their faith. They want to see what their faith looks like. They want to see what our faith looks like. And by the Spirit's power, this community is showing people what faith looks like. Bonhoeffer stated this. And remember, Bonhoeffer was a good German Lutheran. And let me tell you, I went to a German Lutheran seminary, and they love guilt, and they love sin, and they love confessing your sins over and over, and they love to talk about being poor, miserable sinners. So this is strange for Bonhoeffer to say this. He says, being a Christian is less about cautiously avoiding sin than about courageously and actively doing God's will. So as I've meditated on this transfiguration story, and on Bonhoeffer, and on Martin Luther, and on Martin Luther King, and on all sorts of other male and female figures of change in our world, I'm drawn to the power that I find in their lives and in this transfiguration narrative. The words from Annie Diller I've used before, and I want to share those again. And Annie refers to the power of God. She's an author, she's a poet, she's a fabulous writer, and if you hadn't heard of her, you should. She says, does anyone have the foggiest idea what sort of power we so blithely invoke when we invoke God? Or as I suspect, does no one believe a word of it? The church is our children playing on the floor with their chemistry sets, mixing up a batch of TNT to kill a Sunday morning. It is madness to wear ladies' straw hats and velvet hats to church. We should all be wearing crash helmets. Maybe next Sunday, ushers, you can pass those out at the door. And I'll cross the line a little further. Ushers should issue life preservers and signal flares. They should lash us to our pews. Ushers, you ready for that? For the sleeping God may wake someday and take offense, or the waking God may draw us out to where we can never return. I love those words. Why shouldn't we believe in a God that transforms, that transfigures us individually? Why shouldn't we believe in a God who transforms our political and our religious structures? Why shouldn't we believe in a God who can transform our world through us? The story of the Transfiguration, the entire narrative, the narrative of a simple Lutheran pastor like Bonhoeffer reminds us that God can and God will work through you and through me. God can transform and will transform broken and oppressive religious and political structures through us. God can transform us and do the work of transformation through us. That's the story. That was the mantle that was being passed on here on the Mount of Transfiguration. And actually, even Pope Francis believes this. Pope Francis says, only trust in God can transform doubts into certainty, evil into good, and night into radiant dawn. Only God can transform doubts into certainty, evil into good, and night into radiant dawn. May it be so among us.